Hey, Mr. P here. In this video, we're going to talk about movement or continue our discussion of about movement. We're going to focus on the synovial joint mechanisms, meaning we're going to talk about what the purpose of these joints are. We're going to dive in and talk about the anatomical structures that the joints have in order to allow them to function the way that they do, and really get a good glimpse and a good understanding, hopefully get a good understanding of how the joint is structured in order to kind of fully understand the whys for why it's structured the way it is in order to give us kind of how it works. So let's dive in. What is a synovial joint? A synovial joint is a joint that is bone to bone, meaning bone is going to contact bone. Now, there are some things that are going to allow for cushioning or decrease friction and comfort so that it's not bone grinding on bone, but it is a bone-to-bone joint. You can see these bone-to-bone joints, specifically in the hips, knees, elbows, shoulders, for some extent, or to some extent, the wrists and the ankles. But they are also self-contained or have a self-contained capsule area that contains lubricant called synovial fluid. Synovial joints contain synovial fluid. You can see, as we will talk in a little bit, where these particular fluids are kept. But the ends of the bones within the capsule are also coated with a structure called cartilage in order to cushion any bone-to-bone contact in order to reduce friction. So, synovial joints have totally encased fluid and cartilage, which reduces friction and increases lubrication. Okay? So these areas include the shoulders, the elbows, the hips, like I said, the knees, and to some extent elbow or to wrists and the ankles. Now, when we dive into what this synovial joint looks like, you know that there are ligaments. Now, we talked in our last video about what ligaments are. Remember, ligaments are your bone to bone. You have joint capsules, which is going to be kind of a layer that is going to kind of contain all of the synovial joint fluid. You also have a synovial membrane, which is going to be on the inside of our joint capsule, which again helps to contain that synovial fluid. You obviously don't want the synovial fluid leaking out. You want to keep it within that joint cavity that contains the synovial fluid, and that, like we said, is going to increase the lubrication and therefore decrease friction. So, if we dive into one of these synovial joints, like the elbow, you will see that there is a lot of different joint parts, and each of these joint parts is going to have a particular function. So this is a perfect illustration of the saying that function is dictated by structure, or structure dictates function, right? So that is kind of a unifying theme in biology. Structure always dictates the function. Something that needs to function a certain way has to be structured a certain way that allows that function to take place effectively and efficiently. So, what is the joint parts that is important? The first is cartilage. Okay, now cartilage is the kind of the covering that is designed to reduce friction and absorb the compression, especially in a knee where all of your body weight is always originates in that knee joint, right? Your knee joints are carrying with your hips and other things like that, carrying the brunt of your body weight, and therefore when you walk, jog, run, sprint, you are putting a lot of compression and a lot of body weight onto the heads of those bones, and so you need a structure that allows you to absorb the compression and reduce friction. That's what cartilage does. The synovial fluid, that is going to lubricate the synovial joint. It's also going to reduce friction and provide nutrients to the cells of the cartilage. It's going to basically keep the cartilage fresh and be one of those companion molecules or those companion parts to keeping the cartilage in good form. The joint capsule, that surrounds the joint. It encloses the synovial cavity and unites the connecting bones. The joint capsule is going to be kind of what keeps that synovial or that joint lubricated. It's going to keep that synovial fluid in place. It's also going to keep any unwanted parts from getting in and disrupting the friction or disrupting the smoothness of that particular joint. Tendons and ligaments. Tendons are those structures that are going to attach muscle to bone. We talked about that in the first video. And ligaments are going to be the connection points from bone to bone. You have both. In any of these synovial joints, you have ligaments like the ACL, PCL, stuff like that in your knee. But those are going to connect bone to bone, and then tendons are going to attach the muscles to the bones in order to allow the joint to move like it should. The bicep muscle, because again we're talking about the human elbow, is going to contract to bring about the flexion part of the arm movement. So that is the bending of the arm. That's going to cause the arm or the lower arm to bend up towards the upper arm. The tricep muscle is going to contract to straighten the arm. That's called the extension part, or the straightening of the arm. Again, these work in antagonistic pairs. So we talked about what that means, antagonistic. You have to have antagonistic pairs in order to move a joint. The humerus is the big upper arm bone that acts as the anchorage part for the muscles of the elbow. So the bicep and the tricep is going to be attached to the humerus, specifically on the upper end of the humerus. That is a bone that is really not designed to move, okay? You can move it at the shoulder, but you're not going to move the upper arm bone at the elbow. And then you have the radius and ulna. The radius is the kind of top arm bone that is going to act as a lever for the bicep muscle. And then you have the ulna, which is going to be this bottom bone in this diagram, which is going to act as a lever for the tricep muscle. Notice the tricep is attached to the ulna. The bicep is attached to the radius. You have two lower arm bones because you have two upper kind of arm muscles. And each one is going to attach to a different bone, and those are going to work antagonistically as well. Okay, the elbow is a hinge joint that allows it to move kind of in a limited range of motion, but it's going to allow it to move up and down as it extends and extends. Okay, so that's the human elbow. The human knee is much the same way. Okay, you're going to have antagonistic muscles. In this case, you're going to have the quads and the hamstring. You're also going to have an upper leg bone and two lower leg bones. Notice that the hamstring, which is the back muscle of your leg, is going to be attached to the fibula, and then the quad on the front of your leg is going to be attached through the knee and the patellar tendons to the tibia, which is your the biggest of the lower leg bones. You also in the knee have a lot of different ligaments. You'll also have some tendons. Okay, again, tendons are going to attach those muscles to the bones. Ligaments are going to go bone to bone. But all of those, while they aid in muscle contraction and movement, they're also going to add some stability and some structural strength to that particular joint. The knee is a pivotal hinge joint, which functions primarily as a hinge, but does allow for a bit of pivoting rotation as well. You can kind of see the limited pivoting motion if you kind of lift your leg and kind of turn your toe from right to left, or your foot from right to left. There is a bit of pivoting in the knee, but for most part, the knee is only designed to move front and back. But there's a lot of different structures, like I said. There is cartilage and synovial fluid that is going to lubricate and protect the knee joint. This is a synovial joint, just like the human elbow is, but it is kind of beefed up because there is more pressure and more weight put on that knee joint in comparison to the elbow. There are strong ligaments that hold the knee in place despite tremendous force against them. Okay, anybody that does anything kind of athletic or anything in sports knows that you can put a lot of force and a lot of lateral force on the knee. Sometimes it does, give out, and those tendons and ligaments can tear. But for the most part, you can put a lot of force on these and keep the knee structurally sound. The human hip is another one of these synovial joints. It allows for movement in all axes and planes. It is called a ball and socket joint. Another ball and socket joint is the shoulder. But this provides the greatest range of motion, and that can be seen if you try to kind of move your leg at the hip. It can move front back, side to side. It can go in a circle, and that is indicative of a true ball and socket joint. Okay. Again, it's a synovial joint, so you have synovial fluid. You've got lubrication in that joint. You have cartilage, which is going to reduce friction. All of those things are in place just like in the elbow and in the knee. That's all we have for this particular lecture, another really quick lecture, but hopefully this provided a little bit of anatomical structures of those synovial joints, kind of the purposes of those particular parts of the joint. And in our next video, we're going to dive into kind of, like I said before, the intricacies of muscle contraction, looking at the muscle fibers, looking at how those muscle fibers shorten and lengthen, get into what actin and myosin is. So if you have any questions, bring those to class. See ya.